Yeah, thank you very much. We focus on the barriers, but also solutions to these barriers for strategic planning and programming. Of course, we had the 4 groups rotating, and we tried to build upon what each group said. But we had a lot of themes that came back in the different rooms, the different discussions. And one of them, which was actually the first remark that was made, is that countries feel that this is a new issue, planning for climate resilient infrastructure. And first of all, they felt that this is a new area that they didn't have a lot of experience in, so it was difficult to identify actually barriers. But they did feel that there are a lot of frameworks already going around for planning for climate resilient infrastructure, and there was a request that instead of having multiple frameworks to assess how to plan for climate resilient infrastructure, that you need one unified framework, so that countries are not faced that they use one framework and then they go to a certain donor or to a bank, and this bank says no, but we use a different framework. So that was a big ask in this group, and then. The other questions that we tackled then is, so what do you actually plan for? So if we look, we want to plan strategically, we need good data, and in a lot of areas this is still lacking. Although we also had somebody who said, well, we have the data, but we also, as researchers working with this data, face the problem of how do we translate that into something that is useful for policymakers and decision makers and investors. And that came to the question, so we need data that tells what does this mean for me and what do I need to do? And based on that information, you can actually plan. And then we also touched upon the issue that there are already a lot of plans there, but the implementation is usually what is lacking. And so instead of having a new plan, which is also one of the other issues, is that we should not focus just on new investments, but we should also look at the existing infrastructure that's there. So if we plan, take that into account as well, and not only focus on new, making sure that new investments are climate resilient, but also retrofitting basically the existing ones. And then if we want to do that for the planning, one of the problems is that we need to convince politicians still often for the need for planning for climate resilient infrastructure, because, well, they also faced with a lot of competing needs and competing requests. So what really works if you have a high level buy-in of this, where the need or the request for the planning comes from. And one of the areas that we then, all the way at the bottom of the planning process, or maybe the start of the planning process, is that you involve local communities on their knowledge, but also on, so what does this mean if we start to invest in this area for you? How do we accommodate their requests and their concerns? And I think those were the main barriers and gaps. And then we tried to focus on sort of, which is on the next slide, how do we, are there good examples of where these barriers for planning have been able to, are we able to overcome this? If we have a next slide. But, well, it's pretty empty. Could have told you that. We haven't been able to identify yet any good planning sort of exercises, but we came up, what helps often is setting standards and making sure that those standards are appropriate but also flexible, especially in terms of adaptation. When you talk about building standards, they can differ from place to place. And we had some discussion on, well, I'm from the Netherlands, an example that we have from the Netherlands where we set certain standards for embankments, which help us to integrate resiliency into procurement and investment, because everybody has to build up to that standard. And then we had an example from Nepal where they were able to, where they successfully or had a very successful program because they integrated or they local knowledge into the infrastructure building in this area. And another one that focused on this is an example from the UK, also on standards and also on the assessment methods, which is the UK BREEAM program, which has been very successful in guiding master planning of projects in infrastructure and buildings. So that was group one.